Hey, this is Benjamin Boyce. I talk on YouTube. To you, my tube. So, responding to a couple instances of feedback that I've gotten to tighten things up and maybe to get to the point more quickly, I wrote this one out. So I'm going to read my own words and maybe I'll comment on them, like I read other people's words and comment on them. When I first began speaking about the events that occurred at Evergreen State College in the spring of 2017, I felt like I needed to walk on eggshells. Because the protests were about racism, it would be easy for me to be seen as pro-racist or racist for criticizing anti-racists. But the more I looked into the claims of racism that fueled the Evergreen protests, I found that these claims were based on the assumption of racism and not objectively verifiable, factually racist events or acts. The protesters, and it turns out the teachers that taught them how to protest, were operating within a framework that is alternately called social justice, intersectionality, postmodernism, and critical theory, which framework is built on the narrative dynamic of oppressor and oppressed. This narrative, furthermore, operates on terms of systemic oppression and privileges context and category over instance and individual. Also, its epistemology, its way of thinking, is founded not on understanding, but on changing the world. As I proceeded with my work on Evergreen, I became less concerned with being seen as a racist, especially when I saw that the protesters and activists were so liberally, or illiberally as the case may be, using accusations of racism to shut down criticism and debate. Which became ludicrous when Professor Zoltan Grossman, who I did a video on, attempted to delegitimize my argument against him by ignoring my argument and selecting 6 unsavory YouTube comments to prove that I am in cahoots with the alt-right, and thus may be summarily dismissed. Now, with Laurier, a similar methodology is working itself out. Lindsay Shepherd shows a clip of a debate about using the legal apparatus to compel speech having to do with gender pronouns, and is taken aside and accused of exposing students to hate speech. Jordan Peterson, who was in that video, is likened to Hitler, called a transphobe, and is accused of doxing his own students, which accusations are supplemented with nary a citation. When Lindsay asks to be shown the complaint against her, her professor, Nathan Rambukkana, says that it's confidential. Even the number is confidential. Investigators have since stated that they have found no evidence that such a complaint against Lindsay was made. The audio of this meeting is given to the press, and there is an outcry about the way in which Lindsay was treated. The admin issue a perfunctory apology, as does Rambukkana, and then there are some rallies, lists of demands, articles, and as well some petitions, a couple petitions. What shakes out is that there are basically 2 camps now. One is pro-freedom of speech, and the other is pro-LGBTQ plus asterisk, no asterisk, and 2, but I think it should be a superscript 2. I'm just going to compact all that down to trans issues. I'm just going to talk about transphobia for the rest of this video. So there's freedom of speech, and then there's trans issues. One side believes that it is important to talk about a variety of issues from a variety of perspectives, and the other side claims that speech that is harmful to certain groups is immoral and, according to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, illegal. The pro-trans group exercises their right to assemble and to speak, to tell others what they must and cannot say. They demand that the administration and the public, 1, apologize, and 2, recognize, presumably verbally, their existence. Now, on the face of it, this is self-contradictory. To use speech to limit speech, to attempt to silence others in order to stand up for, to use their words, groups that are silenced or are not often heard. What I want to point out beyond the hypocrisy of the activists at Laurier and Evergreen, and by activists I include both faculty and students, is that activism, as it is currently being taught and practiced, is harmful to the causes espoused by the activists, and ultimately, this activism is unnecessary. To see how this is harmful, let's say that there are three components at play. There's the issue, and there's the activist, and then there is the public, right? So there's the issue, and this issue is tied to a group or groups of people who are mistreated and who are quantifiably, in most cases, mistreated by the public. Now, what the activist does is insert themselves in the relationship between this mistreated group and the public by interceding on behalf of the mistreated group and attempting to seek to change the perception and the principles of the public as they are directed to the group. Now, in the case of trans issues, the activist ideally desires that society becomes aware of the experience of transgender individuals, to empathize with the difficulty of their situation, and then for the public to accept and support transgender individuals, right? So awareness becomes empathy, which becomes acceptance. And from acceptance, the assumptions that the public has of transgender individuals is changed, presumably, hopefully, for the better. Which goes to say that society's principles are modified to no longer discriminate against this group, thereby dissolving the issue. Right. So the activist's ultimate goal is to dissolve their activism, is to end the need for activism at all. So how harm occurs, principally, I want to argue, is that activists are attacking liberalism itself. And liberalism is built into Western or modern society. The principles of liberalism is founded on the responsibility of the individual to live their own life and the right of the individual to develop their life how they see fit. And secondarily, liberalism enshrines freedom of expression, which allows that groups of individuals work by means of debate through a variety of ideas and experiences. Debate allows for the exchange of experiences and ideas, and through that exchange, different ideas can be tested. And what activists are currently seeking to do is to regulate that free exchange and control the process of examination. So you can hear this in the meeting between Lindsay Shepherd and Nathan Rambukkana, when Rambukkana insists that there is a proper way to what he calls contextualize Jordan Peterson so that Peterson's ideas will be seen as harmful and thereby not cause harm. By attempting to shut down these discussions, and furthermore to compel what others adopt as their worldview through speech acts, current activists are assaulting the very principles that are already working toward greater understanding and acceptance of the groups that these activists are fighting for. The activists are fighting against that which will ultimately result in the acceptance of the people that they're fighting for. The second harm is that these activists are tying the public perception of the groups that they're fighting for to what the activists are doing. So the activists are standing in the way of, let's say, so there's the public. Let's say I'm the public, and then there's a transgender person, right? And then the activist comes down and starts assaulting my principles on behalf of this transgender individual. And what's going to happen if I'm the public is that I'm going to marry those two things, and I'm going to see transgender people as activists and transgender people as assaulting my liberal principles, which would otherwise allow me to accept them if the activist didn't get in the way. So the activists are basically causing the groups that they're fighting for to be seen by the public as the enemy of the public, in a way. An enemy of Western ideals, of liberalism, of individual responsibility, individual rights, and then the ability to speak about ideas and share experiences and test ideas. The activists are corrupting their own process by becoming the center of the public's attention, and then marrying the issue they are fighting for to their attack on liberal values. What needs to happen is for these activists to be called out for their exploitation of the various issues that they espouse. Issues, furthermore, that if were resolved would then delegitimize these activists who have spent thousands of hours and dollars on degrees and careers that need to be proven to the market as necessary. Activists are therefore incentivized to maintain and not resolve these issues. Hence their adoption of critical theory, which privileges invisible power structures, systemic oppressions, and tribal dynamics over visible acts, factual oppressions, and individual rights and responsibilities. They're basically trying to substantiate their existence as activists when activism will eventually dissolve its need for activism. And these people who are getting all these degrees are not incentivized to do that, because then they won't be able to get all that sweet money that they get they get a lot. These vice principals and these directors of these various student groups get a fair amount of money. Like, at least the professionals get a fair amount of money, plus they spend a lot of money to get those jobs. So that's that. That's what I have to think about that. Hope that was concise and yet also spirited. Good night.